On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, the Steamboat Yellowstone saves Texas. I'm your host, Sal Mercoglano. Welcome to this episode of What's Going On with Shipping. So today we're going to do something a little bit special and different because Maritime Day is coming up. May 22nd is annual Maritime Day in the United States. So I've been wanting to do more history along with our updates on shipping. So I'm going to finally break down and start delving into it, and about once a week do a historically themed topic. And today we're going to delve into the FreightWaves Classic Vault. I've done this in the past, and they're great. FreightWaves had procured the old American Shipper, and American Shipper had these great articles from the past where they would look at shipping lines and ships and a whole variety of great maritime topics. And what I want to do is I want to grab some of these, update them a bit, use them, put some graphics to them, and along with the graphics they're using, and talk about them. And today we're going to talk about the Steamboat Yellowstone. And I think it's a great topic to look at. When we talk about the American maritime history of the nation, we tend to think about blue water, deep draft. What we tend not to think about is steamboats and the inland waterways, and in particularly the inland waterways of the West. So here's a story by Scott Maul. In the era before railways opened up in the West, defined loosely as the area west of St. Louis, horses, stagecoaches, and wagons were the primary means of travel, unless you were lucky enough to be able to travel on one of the nation's navigable rivers. So rivers become the key to understanding the United States. One of my favorite maps is this. This is a map of the river systems of the United States, and in particularly that purple right there in the center is the Mississippi River Basin. Vast amount of waterways going all the way up against the Appalachian Mountains, all the way to the Rockies. If you ever look at an old map of the Louisiana Purchase, you'll understand it better if you understand what it mapped was the waterways of the Mississippi River. Absolutely crucial. Understand that until you have the Claremont going up Albany with Robert Fulton, you don't really have a way to use the waterways two ways. You can only really go one way. This is the difficulty that Lewis and Clark had going up the Missouri River back in the early 1800s to basically chart the Louisiana Purchase. What they need is steamboats, and that's what you get with vessels like this, the Yellowstone. The Yellowstone was a side wheeler. You can see right where it says Yellowstone on the side there, you'll see one of two side wheels. Up forward, you'll see the boilers. You can see the large stacks right here, but down below in those big black cylinders, those are the boilers. You'll see wood stacked up alongside the boilers, and those boilers would provide steam. That steam would then go to engines, which are located underneath where these people are standing, right by where the wheels are, the side wheels are. They would go into those engines to move large pistons. Those pistons would move big, huge arms that would rotate these wheels. Up on the bridge right here, the very top of the vessel, you would have the controls wheel with ropes that would go down to the rudders in the stern. And what made steamboats on the Western rivers so successful were several things. Number one, to have steam power, you need two things. You need fuel, in this case, wood, and then you need water. And why steamboats were so successful in inland waterways was you were using fresh water. Out on the ocean, you were using salt water. And until you can come up with a way to purify the water, to condense the water from salt water into just plain water, remove the salt, you would have corrosion in the boilers. So the inland waterway system was extremely effective. You'll see she has a bow ramp here so that you can nudge this vessel up against the shore, put the bow ramp down. If you needed more fuel, you can chop some trees on the side or stop at an area where there's wood already cut up for you, load it on board, and off you went. And you'll see quarters up here on the top deck for passengers. Below deck, you would have crews and cooking areas right there for everybody. And a vessel like the Yellowstone would be a commonplace vessel on the Western rivers. She departed St. Louis on her maiden voyage in 1831. She was described by the St. Louis Register as a new and handsome steamboat built in Louisville, Kentucky. Is a depiction of the Yellowstone by George Catlin just prior to her maiden voyage, leaving St. Louis and before she would head up to her namesake river, the Yellowstone, in 1832. The Yellowstone was placed in service along the Missouri River between St. Louis and the trading camps and posts further to the north. The owner of the Yellowstone was the American Fur Company, which was founded by John Jacob Astor in 1808. This is where Astoria, Oregon gets its name. It became one of the largest businesses in the nation. Astor started the American Fur Company to compete against two great fur trading companies in Canada, the Hudson Bay Company and the Northwest Company. Initially, Astor began a fur trapping and trading operation in the Columbia River Valley of Oregon. That company was a subsidiary called the Pacific Fur Company. He began a similar effort in the Great Lakes region under another subsidiary, the Southwest Company. However, both companies failed during the War of 1812. But Congress passed an act in 1817 that excluded foreign traders from U.S. territory, making the American Fur Company the biggest company of its kind in the Great Lakes. Astor partnered with the Chateau family of St. Louis in 1821, which gave the American Fur Company a monopoly in the Missouri River region. The American Fur Company was adept at buying out smaller competitors or putting them out of business through stiff competition. In an effort to save money, several of the company's trading posts were closed, which led to increased competition. Although the company managers sought to increase revenues by diversifying into other industries, the company's remaining assets were divided into smaller organizations, most of which failed by the 1850s. On the Yellowstone's first trip, Benjamin Young was the ship's captain. In addition to the ship's captain, Charles LaBarge was the pilot. Pierre Chateau, whose family's enterprise had joined forces with the American Fur Company, was then the company's Western agent, and he traveled on the Yellowstone as well. Others on board included nearly 100 French employees of the company and a crew of 25. The goods being transported to trade for furs included blankets, fabrics, mirrors, knives, combs, beads, axes, gunpowder, tobacco, and liquor. Yes, that's right. And they can never go wrong with bringing booze with you. On the maiden voyage, the Yellowstone made history. The Yellowstone was the first powered vessel to travel beyond Council Bluffs, Iowa, on the Missouri River, about 660 miles north of St. Louis. So to put that in some perspective, she sailed from St. Louis through the state of Missouri and got as far as basically Council Bluffs, Iowa, which is right across from Omaha, Nebraska. So right there on the Iowa-Nebraska border. That was about 660 miles north of St. Louis. The steamboat continued to sail northward on the Missouri and reached Fort Tecumseh, a company outpost, on June 19th, 1831. It was located near what is today South Dakota's capital city of Pierre. We tend not to think about steamboats and boats in South Dakota. It doesn't really spark a lot of people thinking about it, but she was able to make it up there. Low water kept the Yellowstone from moving any further north on the river. The steamboat returned to St. Louis on July 5th, fully loaded with furs. Lots of times these river trips were made early in the spring or early summers. This was done as the rivers swelled up with water coming off the mountains from snowfall that had melted. In 1832, the Yellowstone sailed further north in the Missouri River, reaching the mouth of the river for which she was named. The mouth of the Yellowstone joins the Missouri right here at the border between North Dakota and Montana. So right up here near Beaufort, this area of the border. So, I mean, you're talking about a steamboat getting up almost as high as Montana. Reaching the mouth of the river she was named, the trip was sketched by George Catlin, an artist whose focus was on Native Americans. This image actually catches a great drama of the Yellowstone up on the river, getting about as high as it could get at that time. During 1832 to 1833, the Yellowstone made several trips up and down the Missouri. A journey to Fort Pierre in 1833 was detailed by Prince Maximilian von Wied, a German naturalist, and painted by Karl Bodmer, a Swiss artist, who were passengers on board. During the winter, the American Fur Company made use of the Yellowstone in the lower Mississippi, making trips between New Orleans and the Yazoo River. The Yellowstone had been designed and built to navigate the shallow waters and snags of the Missouri River. These characteristics were also similar to those found on the Brazos River in Texas, where the boat was used in the cotton trade. By 1835, the Yellowstone was owned by Thomas Toby and registered in New Orleans. Toby had the Yellowstone repaired, retrofitted in New Orleans for the Texas cotton trade. In November 1835, the boat arrived in Brazoria from New Orleans. It then ran loads of cotton between San Felipe and Washington on the Brazos. It was manned by a crew from the United States and flew the U.S. flag. On December 31st, 1835, however, it cleared port with a cargo that was largely composed of ammunition and passengers, were primarily volunteers for the Texas Army, including 47 men of the Mobile Grays. The ship arrived at Quintana, which was located at the mouth of the Bravos River. It's really amazing to think that this vessel had been all the way up here on the Montana-North Dakota border, about as far north and west as you can get for a vessel, came all the way down the Missouri River, the Mississippi River to New Orleans, out along the coastal bayous and banks to the area along the Bravos River, just where basically south of where modern day Houston is today. The ship arrived at Quintana, which was located at the mouth of the Bravos, in early January 1836. On the Bravos River, it operated by the merchant firm of Thomas F. McKinney and Samuel M. Williams. In February 1836, the Yellowstone traveled up the Bravos as far as San Felipe de Austin. It was commanded by Captain John F. Ross. So the ship sailed up from the area around Freeport all the way up here to the area just west of modern day Houston. The Yellowstone was loaded cotton above San Felipe when the army led by General Sam Houston arrived on March 31st, 1836. It was raining heavily. Houston and his men set up camp on the west side of the Bravos. It had been 25 days since the Alamo had fallen. At dawn on March 6, 1836, which was the 13th day of the siege of the Alamo, the final battle of the Alamo began. Fighting lasted roughly 90 minutes, and by daybreak, all the defenders had died or had been captured. There's always that issue here. Houston and his army were pursuing General Santa Anna and his troops. Houston pressed the Yellowstone into service to ferry his men across the river, which was flooding due to heavy rains. Captain Ross and his crew of 16 made an agreement. Houston pledged land in the Republic of Texas in exchange for their services and promised indemnity to the boat owners for wages and any damages. Captain Ross later presented a bill for $4,900 to the Texas government, which covered the boat's time and transportation services. The Yellowstone was recognized as an unarmed neutral ship of the United States, and the crew was not required to bear arms. On April 12, 1836, General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, along with 750 men and a 6-pound cannon, began crossing the Bravos downriver from Houston's forces. On the same day, the Yellowstone made the first of 7 trips transporting the Texas Army across the river. After Houston released the Yellowstone from service, the boat and its crew and passengers, protected to a degree by bales of cotton, set off down the swollen Bravos and past the burned ruins of San Felipe on 10 p.m. on April 15th. General Joaquin Yesisma and his division, who had been forewarned about the Yellowstone's journey down the Bravos, shot at the boat with muskets and another 6-pound cannon. The boat was only slightly damaged. On April 26th, the Yellowstone was at Galveston Island. It was commandeered by David J. Burnett, the president of the Texas Republic, to house the nation's cabinet. On May 4th, Burnett ordered the Yellowstone to journey to Buffalo Bayou, where the cabinet was to begin treaty negotiations with the defeated Santa Anna. On May 9th, the Yellowstone began its return voyage. In addition to Burnett and the cabinet, additional passengers included Santa Anna and his staff, the wounded Houston and his staff, General Koss, and 80 other wounded prisoners. The Yellowstone briefly stopped in Galveston, then continued on to Velasco, where the treaty between Texas and Mexico was being written. Captain Ross left the Yellowstone in July 1836. He was replaced by James H. West, who had come to Texas from Pennsylvania with the New Orleans Gray. The Yellowstone transported the body of Stephen F. Austin and mourners from Columbia Landing downriver to Peach Point Plantation in December 1836. It also moved the Texas government, as well as the printing press and staff of the Telegraph and Texas Register, from the Bravos to Houston in spring of 1837. Despite repeated petitions from Sam Houston to the Republic, the full terms of his pledge to land to the crew of the Yellowstone was never met. Dr. A. Ewing traveled on the Yellowstone from Houston to Galveston on May 30th, 1837. It's the last known voucher for the Yellowstone and was signed by Ewing in Galveston. After the trip, the Yellowstone apparently vanished. Since then, there's been theories and guesses about the ship's fate. William M. Lytle believed that the Yellowstone was stranded on the Bravos in 1837 with no lives lost, but his theory is not verified. Another theory is that the Yellowstone sank in 1837 in Buffalo Bayou, which is a slow-moving body of water that flows through Houston. A ship's bell, which is claimed to be from the Yellowstone, is housed at the Alamo Museum. No one really knows the fate of the Yellowstone or its final resting place. However, Sam Houston's words in his petition for the redemption of the pledge are a fitting epitaph. Had it not been for its service, the enemy could never have been overtaken until they have reached the Sabine. And the use of the boat enabled me to cross the Bravos and save Texas. So I think it's a great story about the Yellowstone. I'm not gonna lie, it's one I didn't really know very well, but it's a great one. And one of the things that I think is really missing from a lot of our maritime heritage is the role of boats and ships played in the inland waterways. We know a lot about Mark Twain and life on the Mississippi. We know about flatboats. We know Lewis and Clark. But here, the story of the Yellowstone, going all the way up to its namesake river, transporting material and equipment for fur trappers up in the northern reaches of the United States, and then bringing back the furs for transport to the United States, and then being used to haul cotton, and then providing services for General Sam Houston's army in his fight against Santa Anna. I think it's a great story. I love the story. If you want to read the whole story, it's linked to the show notes. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please hit the bell so that you'd be alerted about new videos. Subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, share it across social media. If you can, head on over to the Patreon page and become a patron of the channel. That helps bring videos like this to you. Until our next episode, this is Sal, signing off.